Good morning, everyone.
Good
My name
morning.
is Emily
Good morning,
Quarles-Mowrer,
Emily.
and I would like to welcome you all to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. This morning, we are once again carving out sacred spaces in our various parts of our home to join in a virtual sanctuary. We'll have music played by the lovely Carly Schell, and we have a shout out to Rick, who does all of our Zooming and technology. Thank you so much. For over 50 years, the UFP has been a liberal religious voice in the Pottstown area. As UUs, we believe that reason and wonder can be in the same place, in the same person, in the same thought at the same time. We believe we can honor the teachings of those who've come before us, even as we explore into the future. And we believe that no one is outside the circle of justice and compassion. We hope your spirit, your heart, and your mind are refreshed as we commit ourselves once again to our 7 guiding principles. In this time more than ever, we embody the words of Kenneth L. Patton, "We arrive out of many singular rooms." We gather this morning, still inside our singular rooms, reaching out across space with our hearts connecting. We don't share a creed, but we share a promise. We promise to honor one another and support one another on our journeys. Our services are different every week, but the loving kindness we offer to one another here is the same. So whoever you are, wherever you come from, and whomever you love, we're glad to have you with us today. And now we have a moment for announcements. Somehow, there we go, announcements. Are there any announcements?
Yeah, I have one. Let me see, get back to my view here. The in the chat box is the click to donate link. And it's this last week, this week, and next week, we're donating all the money from our Sunday Plate collection to the UUA Texas Disaster Relief Fund, so that at the end of the 3 weeks, we'll have one check sent on our fellowship behalf to contribute to that cause.
I have a little announcement. We had our walk yesterday, the UUFP Walking Club. So the next one is everyone is the first Saturday of the month at 10 o'clock. It's going to be at Warwick Park, and just look for emails about it and in the newsletter.
And I have one. We are meeting, the meditation group is meeting on Monday evenings starting at 7:30. If you would like an invitation, please, a Zoom invitation, please contact me either at memberservices@uupottstown.org or just use my email. I will send you an invitation.
And now we will have, even at this time when technology is so vital in providing us with connection, it can still distract us from one another. So at this point, I'd like to remind you to put your notifications on silent, and then take a moment, take a breath, rest your eyes, and we'll listen to something beautiful that Carly has chosen to play for us this morning. Thank you. It's lovely. And now it's time for the chalice lighting. As we, there we go. We light our chalice this morning with the words of Molly Brewer. The chalice lighting for when things aren't okay. My beloved people, I cannot pretend, and so I will not tell you that everything is okay right now, that there's no reason to be angry, or that you must be optimistic, or that you must be at peace. I cannot pretend these things, so I will not tell you to pretend these things. But now our chalice is lit, and all I ask in this moment is that we remember the words of Rebecca Parker. There is a love. There is a love holding each of us. There is a love holding all. By the light of our chalice, let us rest in this love. And now let's pause in a moment of reflection and listen to a musical offering from Carly. The tune is the Tallis Canon, which you may recognize. And it's a tune that's sung with many different words. And today the words that I've put up for us to enjoy are the words of William DeWitt Hyde. Our fellowship is more than a building, and even though our building is closed, our work continues. Please consider donating to the UFP. The link is in the chat or on our webpage, or you can see it below. And as Linda said, for the next few weeks, we're going to be donating to the Texas Relief Fund, our share of the plate. And I will be back in 1 second because I left my book downstairs. Go me. Now you've all been treated to the sight of my lovely cat pajamas that I'm wearing. Because, you know, Zoom, nobody's ever going to see your pants. Wider Circles of Inclusion by Holly Ann Lux Sullivan. The woman standing in front of me is the granddaughter of my patient. She is a born-again Christian about my age who was initially friendly toward me, but is beginning to allow her suspicion to show. I saw that coexist bumper sticker on your car. What's that about? It's about respecting everyone's beliefs, I say. Then she asks what it means exactly to be a hospital chaplain. Well, I tell her it's all about working with people wherever they are on their spiritual journey, whether they're Christians or atheists or Buddhists. First, she says her own faith wouldn't allow her to work as a chaplain because she would need to lead people to Jesus and tell them the truth. You could hear the capital T. Then she looks at me and asks without a hint of humor, so what do you tell atheists? That hell isn't that hot? I pray that angry blood isn't rushing to my cheeks as I feel heat surging into my chest. I smile and let out a nervous giggle and say, no, I talk with them about what they want from the last weeks or months of their lives and how I can help them through this time. The conversation veers disturbingly to her thoughts on homosexuality and abortion. She is not, shall we say, a proponent of marriage equality. These are the moments that are so hard for me. Finding the balance between being true to what I believe so deeply and establishing or maintaining relationships with the people to whom I minister. I remind myself repeatedly, it's not about me or the many LGBT people I care about. It's about her life and experiences, past and present. The conversation feels like an attack on those I love, but it isn't. Still, I get the distinct impression that she is testing me in some way. To my surprise, her opposition to abortion comes from her own experience. She had one before she was born again. Now she talks with women like herself about the forgiveness God has to offer. Yes, for her, abortion is the taking of a life, a sin, but it doesn't mean God doesn't still love her and all the women like her. Admittedly, I'm shocked and delighted by this turn. I'm reminded that even fundamentalist Christians have layers and recognize nuance. When I first began my internship as a hospital chaplain 5 years ago, I knew without a doubt that because I was a Unitarian Universalist, I would be the most open-minded chaplain in training there. It took just a few minutes of rounding on my unit to meet my first Southern Baptist patient and his family to hear him declare, "As long as you believe in the word, you're right by me," and to recognize how intolerant I truly was. It wasn't that I couldn't imagine believing in the Bible. Rather, I was upset because I couldn't imagine believing in one and only one way, one and only one truth for all people, for all time. More than that, I was shocked that he had stated it so bluntly, as though it were a simple fact. Where I live in a rural county in central North Carolina, it is a simple fact. That it was something I was more than a little ignorant of at the time. Stunned into silence, I faced my own previously unrecognized prejudices and assumptions about myself, as well as about those I served and worked with. My smugness going into chaplaincy showed me how far I had to come, and working as a chaplain now continues to show me how far I still have to go. My co-workers in my first clinical pastoral education group were a liberal Presbyterian and a conservative evangelical Christian. I dreaded the day my evangelical colleague would encounter a gay patient, fearing not only the things he would say to the rest of us about the person, but also how he might treat them. Mind you, I never heard him say any such thing. I merely jumped to the conclusion that he would on the basis of his church's stated beliefs. But the reality is that my conservative Christian colleague was able to minister to a young woman contemplating abortion, not with judgment, not with fear-mongering, but with love and compassion. I learned that's what Christian love is, a man seeing a young woman's pain and helping her address it, rather than condemning her or calling her out as a sinner. When I became a hospice chaplain, my chaplain colleagues and supervisor were aware that I'm a Unitarian Universalist, but the nurses and social workers I would work alongside every day hadn't seen my resume and credentials. Many of them have framed quotations from the Bible on their desks, or little signs that say things like, "God is good," or "Don't worry about tomorrow, God's already there." Please understand that I was a journalist in my former life, which meant I was surrounded by happily godless heathens like myself, mostly transplanted Northerners. And the Christians among us were not the kind of Christians who put framed scripture on their desks, or if they would have liked to, they nonetheless didn't because they suspected rightly that they had been made fun of in our cynical, sarcastic newsroom. I experienced some fairly severe culture shock when I came to hospice because suddenly my coworkers who weren't chaplains, talked about God. And my little Unitarian Universalist self had to learn how to navigate this strange world in which people who are not religious professionals talk about their faith regularly. Lucky for me, going to divinity school, doing an internship, training as a hospital chaplain, that cured me of all my issues with Christianity, right? Sadly, no. I had been in my position for 3 full months before I came out as a Unitarian Universalist to my team of nurses and social workers. And even then, it was something of an accident. One day, when one of the social workers said something wonderfully hateful, I said, "Well, you're going straight to hell, and I'm a Universalist," wanting to emphasize that even if a Universalist thinks you're going to hell, well, you must have done something really bad, right? But the joke was lost on my audience. For my colleagues who were born, raised, and educated within the Bible Belt, my comments sparked questions about what Universalists are and what they believe. So I gave them my 30-second history lesson. Well, the Unitarians were heretics because they believed God was one and Jesus was a prophet, not the actual Son of God. And the Universalists were heretics because they believed that loving God wouldn't damn anyone to hell for all eternity. And 50 years ago, all the heretics got together, and now we believe lots of different things. One coworker said incredulously, "So you don't believe in hell?" "No, I don't," I told her. Most Unitarian Universalists would probably say the same thing. I was certain this brief conversation would cause my coworkers' idea of me to change. They don't understand what Unitarian Universalist is. It's weird, it's new to them. Well, I don't really understand conservative Christianity either. What I don't understand is how loving, generous, compassionate people can believe in religious tenets that seem to me to be full of hate. And though I wish my colleagues were more accepting, I still know that they are loving, generous, compassionate people. I've seen them treat their coworkers, their patients' families well, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of religion. Yet I was afraid that they wouldn't see me as compassionate and loving because I don't believe what they do. Well, I was asking for them to do for me what I had been doing for them, getting to know someone and making judgments about them on the basis of personal knowledge rather than on what church they go to or what the church's website says its members believe. I'm glad to say my new coworkers didn't disappoint me. Nothing has been different or weird between us since my big coming out. Coworkers are usually relatively easy to get along with despite differences. When the person in front of you is a member of our own family, things get exponentially more complicated. If a parent, a sibling, or a cousin says something that rankles us, the baggage from decades of relationships inevitably rears its head. There's no separating one offensive comment from years of fraught relationships. Every word feels like an attack. The cliche, pick your battles, exists for moments like this. Your parent, your in-law, Aunt Jill is preaching to you over a holiday meal and you've all but bitten through your tongue. What now? Ask yourself, how have similar conversations gone in the past? Is this family member someone who can engage in conversation about difference without being cruel or offensive? Can I engage in this conversation without being cruel or offensive? Sometimes we have to walk away. Life would be far easier if Unitarian Universalism were a faith that encouraged us to throw up our hands in resignation when faced with challenging people. Instead, our sources remind us that Jewish and Christian teachings call on us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Those teachings are at the heart of Unitarianism and Universalism, and we've included them in our sources of wisdom and inspiration. Coming to terms with our Christian heritage is crucial to our spiritual health. Serving as a chaplain in an overwhelmingly Christian setting has taught me how hard it is to respect others' beliefs when they're so different from my own, especially when those beliefs fundamentally seem disrespectful of mine. I've encountered many people who say flat out that their faith is the only way to live, the only way to salvation. The assumption being, of course, that we are all in need of salvation. Yet when we move past rigid dogma into personal conversation, I've been able to connect with them, often in deeply meaningful ways. Sharing our stories is how we open our hearts to others and to ourselves. It's difficult to be pliable rather than rigid, but trees that survive the storm are not the ones whose rigidity causes them to snap, but those that bend with the winds. It's not that I want to face my own prejudice. None of us does. Doing so, means acknowledging my own ability to be bigoted, cruel, and closed-minded. Yet this is the paradox of my calling. I am called to chaplaincy work that forces me to confront my own intolerance for the intolerant. The call of Unitarian Universalism is for me to be more tolerant than those who refuse to tolerate me. In his poem Outwitted, Edwin Markham writes, "He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in." Darn it. Having problems. There we go. In this time when we are putting physical distance between ourselves and our neighbors and our coworkers and our friends, it's sometimes difficult to feel close enough to connect with others. If you're weighed down by sorrow or bursting with joy, now is the time for joys and sorrows, the time that we can share the personal things in our lives.
I have something. Kay and I went upstate to get our second COVID shot, and that was, I guess, on the 4th. On the 5th, I felt like crap, and then I finally recovered. I think the side effects are pretty heavy, but they're not crazy. So I would encourage anyone who's debating on whether to get a vaccine or not to go ahead. It's not terrible. Plus, it gives you peace of mind.
I have a joy that I got an email from Linda Kaczynski on Friday afternoon saying that she was standing. Undoubtedly, she was pumped full of drugs because she had a huge smile on her face and she was so excited to be now pain-free from her hip. So congratulations to her, and soon she'll be back, hopefully.
Hey. The spirit of life and love be with us today as we celebrate the miracle of modern medicine and as we celebrate people who are able to get out and about without pain in their hips and out and about without fear in their heads. And let us also be mindful of those who have joys or concerns that they are holding close in their hearts. For a reading today, I've brought A Prayer for Humility by Alex Jensen. Spirit of life, I find you in those humble places, the quiet, still spaces where I am held in a love greater than myself. You are the wind in my breath, the fire in my soul, the subtle heartbeat of creation all around me. O God, your love is imposing, yet firm and steadfast, present to all those who would know your peace. You challenge me in my arrogance and move me to listen deeply when I fail. I fail as I always do to see the fuller picture. Spirit of love, you find the gentle words to speak life into me and to hold me while all else around me feels broken. You remind me that I am loved and saved just as I am. Your salvation is in finding that life is lived with love. Remind me of who I am, O holy mystery. Help me to see you in the small, everyday moments where you are found. Grant me the wisdom to listen for you and to seek you in those unlikely and unexpected places. Amen. Now if Carly would play There's a Balm in Gilead. That is one of my favorites. All right, now it is the time for the sermon. I'm going to stop share for 1 minute while I read. Turn the other cheek. So a few years ago, a friend of mine had her car window broken by someone who was looking for spare change. Now, I empathized. It is a pain to replace a car window, and it is really unpleasant to drive in chilly weather with the window down. I guess it's yet another reason that I very rarely lock my car doors. I used to joke that it's perfectly safe to leave my car unlocked because no one knows how to drive stick shift anymore. It's not going to get stolen. And honestly, if someone is in that much need that they would break a window, well, I'd rather have them just go on and take it. I can spare my change. And if someone needs CDs or Band-Aids or extra masks that much, they are welcome to them. I'm willing to turn the other cheek to this offense because it strikes me as insignificant. There are other offenses that I'm not willing to turn the other cheek to, even if they might be insignificant. When my children do something that is ill-considered or inconsiderate, I make sure to tell them about it. I don't want them to think that it's okay to leave your mess for someone else to clean up. I don't want them to believe that hitting is okay or being unkind is okay. I don't want them to learn that rules are only rules for some people. In public life, I struggle. I don't want to be seen as strident or biased, but I also don't want to let misinformation or mean words go unchallenged. And you know, I can't be the only one among us who listens to the news, alarmed at the increase increasing disharmony and disunity that's on display. I can't be the only one among us who's disheartened, who wonders how on earth we'll ever become the United States again. The level of partisanship in our government means that each side is feeling victimized by the other, that each side feels as though the other side owes them an apology. And simultaneously, each side believes that they themselves have done nothing to apologize for. If we look to the Bible for answers, we find in the New International Version, Matthew 5:38 through 40. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, well, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. To me, listening to that passage in the Bible, it sounds like appeasement. It sounds like when British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain allowed Germany to annex this, I'm going to mispronounce this, Sudetenland, hoping that by turning the other cheek, a Second World War would be avoided. At the time, Winston Churchill said, you were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war. A year later, he was proven right. But lest you think I am picking on England, we too had a policy of appeasement in our own history between the northern and southern states in the 1800s. The Compromise of 1850 reset the boundaries of Texas after the Mexican-American War. Texas was a slave state, so taking away the territory it had claimed and admitting California as a free state did lessen the areas in which slavery was allowed. The Whigs also insisted that slave trading be banned in Washington, D.C., although owning slaves in Washington, D.C. was still perfectly legal. However, this same compromise also strengthened the Fugitive Slave Act, which compelled ordinary citizens to aid in the capture of suspected escaped slaves, could press them into service to do this, whether they believed in it or not. And it also took away the right of the accused to a jury trial and the ability for the accused to testify on his or her own behalf, which effectively meant that a free person, upon being captured and accused of being a slave, had no legal recourse. This compromise, among others, held off war for a decade, but it too, to my modern eyes, looks as if it is a choice between dishonor and war. But if this is the result we get, if, as the saying goes, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men should do nothing. This quote is usually attributed to British statesman Edmund Burke, but there's a little bit of disagreement on that. But if the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men should do nothing, then how can we turn the other cheek? Why does that exhortation to turn the other cheek persist? If we look to Buddhism, we find stories such as this one, which I lifted from the website Tom Das, which he lifted from Paul Rep's 1957 compilation of Zen koans, Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. It says, one evening, as Shichiri Kojun was reciting sutras, a thief with a sharp sword entered, demanding either his money or his life. Shichiri told him, do not disturb me, the money's in the drawer. Then he resumed his recitation. A little while afterward, he stopped and called, wait, don't take it all. I need some to pay taxes with tomorrow. So the intruder gathered up most of the money and started to leave. Hey, thank a person when you receive a gift, Shichiri added. So the man thanked him and ran off. A few days afterward, the fellow was caught and confessed, among others, to the offense against Shichiri. When Shichiri was called as a witness, he said, oh, this man is no thief, at least as far as I'm concerned. I gave him money and he thanked me for it. After he finished his prison term, the thief went to Shichiri and became a disciple. Fans of Les Miserables may recognize the echoes of this story in Jean Valjean's interaction with the priest, where Jean Valjean takes a candlestick and the priest When he is caught, the priest brings out the other candlestick and said, "Oh, my son, you have forgotten this one." The moral of both of these stories is that radical compassion can change a person's heart. For the past 2 weeks, StoryCorps, the nonprofit that shares and archives the stories of everyday Americans, has been sharing the story of the family of Tarek Khamisa and Tony Hicks. In 1995, Tony Hicks shot and killed Tarek Khamisa in a robbery gone wrong. Tony was just 14 years old. He was charged as an adult and went to maximum security prison at the age of 16. In the years that followed, moved in part by his faith as a Sufi Muslim, Tariq's father, Azim, reached out to Tony's grandfather, Ples Felix, and together they started a restorative justice foundation in Tarek's name. 5 years after Tarek was killed, Azim met Tony for the first time, and they talked about their meeting on StoryCorps. If you listen to it, it gives new meaning to the nickname Story Cry. During the second week, this past Friday, this is when it aired, we hear Tony speaking with Tarek's sister, Tasreen. She first visited Tony 15 years after her father did. She said, "When I looked at him, I thought that this was a really kind person who made a really poor choice." She said that meeting Tony and stripping back that last layer toward forgiveness made room in her heart for light to come in. Maybe that's why it persists. When we turn the other cheek, we open our hearts. We make ourselves vulnerable, but we also make new beginnings possible. And when we look at some of the major movements that have caused great cultural shifts that bend, as they say, the arc of history toward justice, we find that civil disobedience works. We find that staring injustice straight in the eye and lifting the other cheek towards a blow can make a difference. The women's suffrage movement was one with speeches and marches and rallies. If we start counting from the first Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls in 1848, it took almost 3/4 of a century before the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. But slowly, over time, what had originally been seen as ludicrous or against nature became a new beginning. The civil rights movement in the US is often considered to begin with the desegregation of the US Armed Forces in 1948. And following that, there were court cases and speeches and marches and sit-ins that eventually led to the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Again, the movement itself was largely peaceful, even when the reactions of the oppressors were violent. In fact, the violence of the powerful, contrasted against the endurance of the subjugated, served only to highlight that the laws were unfair. In 1958, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the LGBT magazine One, the homosexual magazine, when the FBI and US Postal Service tried to argue that the magazine, just for being what it was obscene. This marked the first time that the Supreme Court upheld the rights of homosexuals. Through picketing and parades, through sit-ins and sip-ins, because there was a belief that homosexual patrons of bars were somehow inherently disorderly, there were laws against serving homosexual patrons at bars. Through court cases, through speeches, through marches, the cause advanced to marriage equality in 2015. These causes were able to advance not through war, but through working together and working within the system to change the system. But part of the reason that they were able to effect these changes is that there was a large body of ordinary Americans who were there to witness their struggle. They witnessed from the outside. Is having an audience part of the success of these movements? Is turning the other cheek most successful when there's someone to watch you do it? brings me to the concept of game theory. Game theory is a branch of mathematics that tries to analyze behavior and strategy in the context of decision making. So a fun example of game theory is this free online game called The Evolution of Trust. This game is described and broken down in Doug Moore's 2017 article for clearerthinking.org. But I'll break it down. The Evolution of Trust is a prisoner's dilemma type game. If you haven't heard of prisoner's dilemma, this is basically what it's about. So the prisoner's dilemma is that two people are caught for a crime and taken to separate rooms. Now they're both asked to confess to the crime, and there are three possible outcomes. First, they both remain silent. They tell the same story, and they both get a 1-year sentence. Second, and this can happen in one of two ways, either person could do it. One person speaks up, but the other person stays silent. The one person who stays silent gets a 3-year sentence, and the one who turned his buddy in goes free. Third, they each throw each other under the bus, and they both get a 2-year sentence. The prisoner's dilemma is all about trust. Do you trust that the other player will not turn you in? So in the evolution of trust, the game, the prisoner's dilemma is point-based instead of prison sentence-based. And instead of one single round, it's played in multiple rounds. And there are different setups of this game, but in one setup of the game, lots of people play together and they use different strategies, and only the players with the most successful strategies move on. And the results tend to show that the people who trusted all the time were taken advantage of, so they lost. The people who trusted none of the time, the people who always turned people in, well, nobody trusted them, so they lost as well. The best strategy seemed to be to trust first. And then if someone was untrustworthy, well, don't trust them. But if they try to regain your trust, then forgive them. If we think about game theory and the prisoner's dilemma, and we try to apply it to real life, everyone does better when we trust. But there are some assumptions in this game. We're assuming that life is set up so that the benefits of cooperation are more than the benefits of defection. We're assuming that the game is set up so that there is such a thing as a win-win where everyone does better when they work together. What if the prisoner's dilemma set up? What if the penalty for remaining silent was the same as the penalty for throwing your friend under the bus? You get 2 years whether you're trustworthy or not. But you could go free if you're not trustworthy. You know, would you still work with your friend? Is there still an incentive there? And now when you think about the way that our systems are set up, our systems of government, our systems of justice, are they set up for the win-win? Are they set up so that everyone does better together? Is turning the other cheek always the right thing to do? I don't know. The real world is always going to be more complicated than the model. For me, though, I'm afraid that if we teach only that it's better to turn the other cheek, we're teaching people to stay with abusive spouses. I'm afraid we're teaching children to stay silent when someone's being bullied. I'm afraid we're teaching our legislators to stand down instead of stand up when reforms are blocked. On the other hand, refusal to compromise is a reason for partisan gridlock. On the other hand, hitting a bully puts the bully in the right and the defender in the wrong. On the other hand, speaking out may be a life or death situation for an abused spouse. What if there is no right answer? So there's another Zen story that comes to mind right now. I'm choosing the retelling that is on the UUA website as part of the Tapestry of Faith curriculum. It goes like this. Bankai was a famous Zen teacher in Japan long ago. Students from all over came to his monastery for months of study and meditation. To make it through such intensive training is not an easy thing. There is much hard work to be done, many hours of meditation, little sleep, only small spare meals. Once during that time at the monastery, a student found that all he could meditate on was his empty stomach. It was also all that he thought about during work and all that he thought about even while eating. Finally, he could not stand it a day longer, and in the night, ever so quietly, he sneaked into the kitchen, hoping to make off with something tasty and filling. But the head cook, always alert even when asleep, awoke and caught him. The next morning, the matter was brought to Bankai in hopes that the student would be forced to leave. However, much to the group's dismay, Bankai thanked him for the information and then acted as if nothing had happened. Just a few days later, the same pupil was caught stealing food from the kitchen again. The students were even angrier. It was the middle of the night when the thief was apprehended, but they wrote a petition right there and then to their teacher. They each vowed to leave the monastery the very next day if the thief was not expelled. When Bankai read the petition the next morning, he sighed. He went outside to the monastery gates and he paced thoughtfully. At last, he asked that all the monks and the students, including the thief, be brought together. They gathered in the temple hall, becoming quiet when Bankai entered. Many of you have come from far away to be here, announced Bankai. Your hard work and perseverance are to be praised. You are excellent, dedicated students. You have clearly demonstrated that you know wrong from right. If you wish, you may leave this monastery and find another teacher. But I must tell you that the thief will remain, even as my only student. The students were appalled. A murmur of discontent hummed about the room. How could their teacher ask them to leave? Who had done the wrong thing? Only the thief. Feeling the anger of the other students, the thief in their midst hung his head in disgrace. My friends, Bankai gently continued, this thief does not understand the difference between right and wrong as you do. If he leaves, how will these things be learned? He needs to stay here so he can also understand. When the thief heard these words, he felt profoundly moved. Tears sprung to his eyes. But even through his shame in front of the others, he felt Bankai's deep compassion. He knew he would not steal anymore. Bankai ended his speech. He left the hall, leaving his students to make their individual decisions. The thief immediately took a spot on a meditation bench and set about meditating. Many of the students stood right up to leave the monastery. Somewhat confused by Bankai's speech, they discussed things amongst themselves. All except for the presence of one student, the thief. The great hall emptied for a time. When Bankai returned an hour later, it was so quiet that he assumed that all the students had left, just as they had vowed. But much to his surprise, every last student had returned. All were quietly sitting, composed in meditation. The wise and kind Bankai smiled at such a wonderful sight. So, I'm going to share next. This is our closing music today. And it is really, this is actually one of my favorite things I've found on the web so far. It's a version of the African-American spiritual Shine on Me, performed by Melanie DeMore. Melanie DeMore is a Grammy-nominated singer, composer, choral conductor, music director, and vocal activist who believes in the power of voices raised together. I hope you enjoy her singing as much as I do.
I'm going to sing a song with you called Shine on Me. It's an amazing spiritual that anybody can sing. And in these days when the things that we're dealing with, the feeling separate and all of that, and things seem so hard, this is one of those songs that you just throw your head back, put it in your medicine kit. All you have to do is ask. And here's how it goes. Shine on me, oh shine on me. Let the light from the lighthouse shine on me, oh shine on me, yes, shine on me. Let the light from the lighthouse shine on me. Lift me up, oh, lift me up. Let the light from the lighthouse lift me up, oh, lift me up, yes, lift me up. Let the light from the lighthouse lift me up, oh, hold me close, yes, hold me close. Let the light from the lighthouse hold me close, yes, hold me close, oh, hold me close. Let the light from the lighthouse, please, hold me close. Oh, shine on me, yes, shine on me. Let the light from the lighthouse shine on me, oh, shine on me, yes, shine on me. Let the light from the lighthouse shine on me. All you have to do is just ask. The light is always there. Always. Always. Oh, yeah.
Now it is time to extinguish the chalice. Our chalice has been shining on us during this hour when we are together. And now it is time to extinguish the flame. But we shine on. We shine in with that light within us that can never be extinguished. We carry our lights in our hearts and in our hands until we can shine together again. Amen. Blessed be. Salam. Shalom. Shine on. Thank you for joining us today. Please stay for virtual coffee hour.
Did